Let's make a start. I want to make a start today by posing a question and turning the whole thing into a dialogue. See what you understand from the point that we had, and how we can go ahead developing it and answering it. How do we define relativism, and why is it such a critical issue, particularly for the person that posed the question in the first place?
Why do we think that relativism is an issue?
Yeah, what is it, a bad issue, a good issue, bit of this and bit of that? Or
I think like the best analogy that a professor once described relativism is that it's kind of like when you get rid of the gold standard. He's like, ever since we got rid of the gold standard, we've been free falling ever since. So I think the problem with relativism in ethics or in truth is that you have no standard or no stable ground to stand on. And you just become literally like a vessel that you can just take in its surroundings, as opposed to a critical thinker who doesn't mind standing for something.
Well, to a degree it's okay, but at the same time, does that mean that we reject relativism or the differences that exist between cultures and ways of life? And even Quran says لَكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا شَرْعَةً وَمِنْهَاجًا. So these differences, what do they tell us?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Anybody, it's open for conversation.
I think I would say that in terms of different cultures and learning from each other, it's fine to learn, but it's also very important to, as an individual and not in your reaction to others, you hold on to something. So you can learn a lot, for example, from interacting, especially living in the West. We have that advantage where we can interact with non-Muslims, we can interact with people from various cultures that you don't get from overseas. And it enables a person to kind of, we have a very unique perspective and take on things because of our experiences here. But at the same time,
But relativism doesn't remove your agency to stick to your own opinion in principle.
In principle, okay. Mm-hmm.
So you still can believe in relativism, but still believe that, as a matter of fact, it predicates itself on variation and differences.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
So the answer is not convincing, in a sense that you say, I reject relativism because I want to remain steadfast on my principle, because the relativism as such does not remove your agency to stick to your principle. As a matter of fact, it wants it to be for you to stick to your principle and somebody else to stick to their principle. Where are the fundamental problem? So cultural differences or cultural relativism, or let me clarify something. There is a misconception where differences are interpreted as relativism. Differences not necessarily relativism. Relativism is what we call a judgmental issue, that you're trying to say something that equally valid, all these differences or all these opinions are equally valid and on the same level. If we were to remove that, we all believe that there are differences. There is a story about Dariush, the Iranian king, the Sassanid king. During his days, he was grappling with this concept of relativism as much as the Greek philosophers. And during his travels, he came across the Greeks, for example, that the Greeks those days would have eaten part of the family, according to the story, whether it's true or not, that's a difference. But they would have eaten the body of their grandparents or respected individuals. And then when he went to India, they would have burned it. So he organized a meeting, some kind of discussion in which a group of the Greek philosophers and a group of the Indian philosophers and presented those ideas. Would you be prepared to eat? Certainly not. Would you prepare to burn? Certainly not. So each community, each culture had a way of life in which they had their own rationale as a respect for, say, their elders, that you allow them to go into the hereafter, those who believe that they have to be sacrificed very quickly before they become decrepit, so they go in with the full faculty. And the other one said that once they die, then we burn their body, and the ashes, as a sign of respect, will be spread around. Each rationalized their point of view. The fact that it exists culturally, differences in culture, I don't believe is a problematic. Where is the problem?
I think that. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. And sisters and you, Brother Hussein, if please come in, because these kind of issues, not just I want to come out of it as with some narratives. We have to have a clear understanding where is the problem.
I think personally, I would define the cultural as just as diversity,
Mm-hmm.
in and of itself, which I think is necessary and beautiful in and of itself. But I think where the issue would come in for what I'm seeing it as is how a person defines what truth is, and how a person defines what good is, and I think the forms and shapes that they take when they're derived from something that is secular or mundane. So and I think with many people, or from my limited experiences.
Sisters, where do you think the problem lies? And where is the challenge?
I believe the problem lies with the definition of God. That's the only place I can signify that, when we're seeking an absolute idea of truth, that to have relativism in that is a fallacy. So I see that to be a place where there is a problem. Another thing that I'm thinking about is when you bring up culture, is when culture precedes this tawhidi way of life, and people, I don't know if I'm saying this properly, but people take their culture, which has, for example, Islamic sentiments or Jewish sentiments in it, and take it as the religion, and it becomes, is it exclusive? Like no one else can come? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Exclusive, so that people are others and they're not welcome. But that thought is stemming from my own thinking of Islam itself right now.
See, now you have cultural relativism, and then you talked about God, concept of God. Mm-hmm. The concept of God is the ontological debate. Mm-hmm. The concept of culture is totally different within the ontological debate. There is the ontological debate. If we go into relativism, is it going to be problematic? There is epistemological debate, source of knowledge. Every society has different sources for their knowledge. The West, in post-enlightenment, more of sensual orientation and your senses, and practical and materialistic one. 200 years before, the same community had different orientation when it came to epistemology. That is not the issue. So where is the issue? Is it purely in the ontological form, which by definition states that there is nothing absolute? Lyotard, in a book that has on postmodernism, he defines postmodernism as the age of the end of what he calls meta-narratives. There are no longer any meta-narratives. I mean, the argument against him, the same claim is a meta-narratives. But once you reject these concepts of meta-narratives, then it becomes postmodernism, which means relatively everything is relative. So I want to go much more in depth into this. Where do we see the problem as people who, when we talk about ethical relativism, what does that mean? When we talk about truth relativism, what does that mean? You talk, sister, about the concept of Tawheed, the concept of one God between the three Abrahamic traditions. There is no consistency and no convergence. The Jewish concept, in principle, in the philosophical term, might be close to Islamic one, but in reality, there are a number of Jewish communities that they don't accept that kind of absolutism. In Christianity is the same thing. There might be one or two minor sects that claims of make similar claim to Islam or absolute monotheistic concept, but not all of them interpret it. The whole notion of Trinity is a classic example. So how do we define, where do we see the challenge? Is it possible to coexist with relativism? If relativism creates the space, going back, Sister Mariam, to what you said earlier, if relativism does not remove the agency for individuals to stick to the principles that they have, so can we really put up with relativism? As an abstract philosophical issue, we continue with our lives. Certainly, there has been appeal to relativism with regard to human right, for example. In 1945-46, when the whole notion of human right charter was being developed, there were a number of Muslim countries that appealed to the cultural differences and talked about relativism. Pakistan was one, Saudi Arabia was another. These were the two, at least, participants within the drafting of human rights chapter or charter. So each one of us will take the code of morality, which literally defines what is good and what is bad, the framework by which we make such a judgment from our own sources. And based on those, we can make a judgment as to what something is good or is bad. Where is the challenge?
There will necessarily be differences from one culture to another.
Certainly.
And one society may say, well, we really have a problem that, the way we see you treating people or the way we see you doing this or that, we have a problem with it, and so we may not wish to agree to this with you, because really we're not agreeing to the same thing at the end, unless maybe at the end there's an overall peace and harmony as a result. It would depend on the magnitude of the differences and the disturbance that one culture causes to another, perhaps. So it may be a problem, it may not be a problem.
Any comment?
Unless I misunderstood, because I think also the problem with relativism is, sure, everybody gets a seat at the table, but then you're always leaving some of your principles behind. It would be one thing, and then another thing is it's also underestimating the effect that relativism has on the public sphere, which is, as I think you can see in this culture, in this society, has little to no moral standard.
Why?
Why did that happen?
No, why do you think that it has, or why should it have such a negative effect?
Why should the public sphere have a negative effect?
No, the concept of relativism to have such a negative effect in this society or any society.
I think it's because it creates chaos.
Why?
Well, when you stand for when there's no, I think, standard, I guess.
But there's
I'm sorry, I'm thinking of like.
There's no absolute standard, but there is a standard in relativism, and the relative standard is the onlooker, the one who's looking, and that is that correct to say? I mean, it's not. I am my own standard.
Yeah, I mean that's as I said last week. This is started with the Greek ideas, and came down when humans became the center or their own the focal point of their own standard. It becomes problematic if we try to unify everything into a single standard.
Can you repeat that?
Relativism causes a problem if we try to unify everything under one standard. One of the post-colonial discourse in politics, for example, the rejection of the what we call political theory, Western political theory, is the appeal to relativism and different cultures. And they use it strongly to reject the political notion or political theories that are imposed by the West. That is West-centric, it has nothing to do with somebody else. Marhum Imam rahmatullah alayh, when he was asked at the incident with regard to the American embassy in Tehran, occupation of American embassy, BBC correspondent went to Iran, and I believe 60-minute correspondent at the moment was in Iran, and they went and had interviewed Marhum Imam. And they said that this is against international law. And he said, who wrote this international law? Were we part of it, or it was written by you? If it was written by you, this is exactly appeal to relativism. That the law that you have created, the standard that you have created, is West-centric. Our understanding of international law is totally different because we were not participant to it. What makes that international law okay to be violated by the superpowers, but it's not okay for us, the third world, to violate it? That's relativism. So, go ahead, sister.
I think applied from a political standpoint or a cultural one, it's a good concept, like the way it was applied by the Imam. However, I understand what Sister Maryam is coming from. If there is no absolute truth, then that will certainly cause chaos eventually.
But nobody is claiming in the concept of what we call relativism, nobody is claiming there is no absolute truth. They say absolute truth is
Relative to the person.
to the environment, to everybody understands their own absolute truth.
I would want to differentiate between two things. One being that I think political relativism does not exist because you need a dominant political, like you need to have a monopoly on ideas if you're going to control. And so the West cannot have relativism in the power, in the political atmosphere, but that's different than, say, what might be happening on the ground level, if that makes any sense.
One could argue, sister, that the argument by the third world and the marginalized political powers that the West cannot have the dominance because the West, in constructing their political theory, they coming out of the Western cultural basis. Mm-hmm. So in reality, what we have is the Western dominance. Mm-hmm. The counter-argument is that all the theories, all the laws, and everything else, all the political structure and economic structure constructed by the West is primarily predicated on Western culture. Mm-hmm. Our culture is different. I mean, when we were talking about post-colonial narrative vis-a-vis a number of issues before, these people would extend that argument that for when I said the book on regarding who speaks for the margin. So now the margin says that what the center talks about is the center's culture. They do not reflect our point of view. Our point of view is different from the center, and they should be given equal opportunity and equal value. This is called for relativism in the political sense. In reality, it might not be present, but the call for it, for equality, our point of view, it's certainly a coexistence of both cultures together.
But I would ask, I think then the pressing issue of relativism, it's almost like it's working almost inversely, in a sense that in the political atmosphere, you could see how the marginalized would want to, utilize the concept of relativism for their own benefit, because now they want a seat at the table and they want their rights to be understood and they want their differences to be accepted. But now on the flip side, you're going to, on the individual level, and the individual's role and them being the center of their own morale or truth, you can see how relativism is now problematic, if that makes sense. So I think I'm seeing it like I'm differentiating the problem into two different settings.
Yeah, I want to see comments from others.
That makes sense.
Certainly, there is a huge appeal now for relativism.
Politically or in the individual level too?
Well, on a number of issues.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, people who in the West, where we don't have as a stronger role for the faith, and we have societies that have their own faith, so both societies would argue that something might be abhorrent in one society, it might be totally okay and justifiable in another society, because the epistemology, the source of knowledge and certainty that comes, are different. In political sense is the same thing. The whole economic structure, for example, if just one example, if you go to Iqtisaduna Shahid Sadr, the whole argument about ownership, the concept of ownership from an Islamic perspective and from the Western perspective, it's huge difference. So if Islam argues for a particular economic system that predicates itself for that kind of understanding, certainly is going to be different from the West. I don't believe relativism per se is going to be problematic unless we move it into the ontological level, where nothing from multiplicity, then nothing is absolute.
Okay, yeah.
That becomes certainly a problem.
But I think that is manifested on the individual ground level, not on the political atmosphere.
In what way?
In a sense that on the political atmosphere, everybody does have standards. They're just asking for people to be relative enough insofar as they can be a participant in the power. And
Only with regard to those who are not strong in their own faith.
yeah, okay.
Relativism doesn't, as I said, relativism needs multiplicity of faith and culture and base. If I'm strong in my own faith,
Oh, okay, I see.
and you are strong in your own faith, that relativism per se means we respect each other's point of view, and the parameters under which this faith would operate will be in a sphere which is related to me, and that will be a sphere that is related to you. It's not asking you to remove your agency and ignore your own principle.
Okay.
It becomes certainly problematic if I don't have anything wishy-washy, I have some wishy-washy ideas about my faith, then I'm confronted with somebody who has a clear understanding of where they are vis-a-vis relativism. And this is what I think. My point of view is that I come from an understanding that I am the center of the earth, and whatever is good, beneficial to me is good. This is the concept of what we call a relativistic morality. But if we are both strong enough in our faith, I don't see why relativism has to remove, simply respects point of view.
Unless the relative truth that that person upholds and truly believes in affects those around them, could you say? Because
In what way it affects them?
let's say a person genuinely believes that harassing another individual is okay, and that it is his duty and his right to do so.
Well, this is, if you look
and you
at,
can't argue him out of it.
you know, the book that I recommended, not last week, the week before, Whose Justice, which was McIntyre.
Mm-hmm.
If you read it, he actually, in principle, he agrees that relativism is there and we have to accept it. But he considers a way out of relativism to understand what is good, to move out of this separation of the two ideas. He says synthesis takes place when the two can sit in conversation, and through basic human values and understanding they can come to some kind of a conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that harming anyone is against my ethical principle. You might believe that no, as long as it's beneficial, it's fine. So long as we have our point of view separate from each other, none of us can prove who's right, who's wrong. It's only when we sit in conversation through fundamental principles that are agreed, and this dialogue takes place, a synthesis would come out that will be respected by both parties. This is the concept that is being used in interfaith dialogue, for example,
Mm-hmm.
to a degree, in which through conversation, Quran calls to it. Ya Ahl al-Kitab, ta'alaw. You come back. Let's sit and have conversation. On what? On fundamental issues that we have in common, not on our differences. You come up with a set of values and you use those values in your conversation to generate a synthesis vis-a-vis a principle that we can apply in our lives. If it is okay to harm anyone else, what will happen if you were the subject? Is it still okay? If it is okay to steal somebody else, what will happen if you were the one who's subject of somebody steals from, or kill, or harm? Is you still say it's okay? So it's through conversation that there are a number of there is a book, Moral Relativism, by Bernard Williams, I believe. It's the truth, I think it's called The Truth in Relativism. And the book is Moral Luck, L-U-C-K, chapter 11. The book was written, I believe, in 1930. But most of the argument that he has in that book applies. And please, I mean, you are all coming out of academic background. These books are extremely useful for you. Because you may not, we all understand that from our own point of view, there is a clear deontological base when it comes to morality and ethics and so on. Books, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, duty, to a degree Kantian as well, but clearly defined way of life. But at least when you read these books, even the older one, the first time that the concept of relativism comes is around 1867. The debate starts. But certainly by beginning of the 20th century, it became an issue that everybody talked about. And a lot of, few people, scholars, even up to today, they are writing about it. So read these books. The argument, this Bernard Williams and a number of others, if you look at it, they particularly the reason why Williams' book is critical, because it picks, I think, 5 major philosophers in the Western philosophical era: Spinoza, I believe Kant, and few others. These are the ones that he collects and analyzes their ethical and moral point of view and say where it leads. I forgot to bring the book for the youth. I have it as I'm unpacking my own books, coming across them. That's it. Hossein Nasr, I recommended that the youth should read. Again, he addresses these point of view in his assessment of the Western political theory or economic theory, whatever, Western philosophers. So McIntyre also is a relevant book, that you cannot escape the idea of relativism. It's a fact of life. Even cultural relativism, you have to accept it, that people do different things. And because each society has their own moral codes, so they consider that is good and bad. They define it in such a way. What is it?
I think that's it. That's sorry, it's okay. I think that's a very good point. But I think for me the issue would be more so from within the Muslim circle, as opposed to the non-Muslims around us, or the families, the kids of our community specifically, and relativism that's infecting our community, as opposed to, because I agree that relativism, when it comes to other cultures and communities, is a necessary fact of life, because you truly, out of respect, and also it's not what Islam promotes, to do otherwise. But within the community, for example, if the way it kind of rubs off on our youth from time to time, who don't have a stable foundation and who do believe that they are the center of their morality, and you cannot talk them out of their beliefs, or you can't have a discussion with them, because at the end of the day, it's what they want and it's their independence and their definition of what is true. I think that, to me, is where I see the problem relying, but on a more, probably better defined than when I first asked my question.
Yeah, I mean, the youth would use anything to justify their way of life. Certainly, the turbulence in their life and the lack of information and so on is problematic. But the absence of a fundamental principle, or at least some principles in their lives, should not be, relativism should not be blamed for that absence.
Okay.
Relativism requires differences of opinion. Gandhi says, every time I go to a mosque, I go to a church, I go to a synagogue, I go to a temple, I come back stronger in my own faith. While he offers full respect for other people in their own religious, moral environment, but he says, I come back stronger in my own faith. As long as you are not making judgment, then different opinions, different ideas exist. The crisis that has developed in the West, because it reduced meta-narratives, values, into singular, individualistic base. Religion becomes just a matter of a personal opinion. Morality becomes a personal opinion. Good and bad becomes a personal opinion. Once you have reduced it to this, then certainly, there is no other way out but to accept that everything is valid. You are members of citizens of a country, you have your own right, you interpret it the way you want. Where is the challenge? The challenge is not to attack here, but to attack somewhere else. And sister, you had something.
Just something that you had said just brought to mind the idea that, I don't know what term you used, but that these things become part of the person and not an approach to something else. So it's, I don't know, something you were saying brought that to my mind. So it takes away, like, okay, let me think about Gandhi for a minute. Every time I attend blah, 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 I become stronger in my own faith. He's removing the labels and extracting the meaning that applies to his faith. So it's for him. It's not about the approach. I don't know what I'm trying to say.
No, what he's saying that he's not making judgment. What matters to him is his own faith.
Yeah, but something else you were explaining even after that made me think that that approach is wrong because it becomes about the individual's faith rather than it being about the approach to what that faith is there for. It in and of itself is like a culture. Do you know what I'm saying?
Not really, but I mean, what I was trying to explain is that when religion becomes part of culture, and culture becomes individualistic, then everything becomes individualistic. And since you live in a society that all individuals are supposed to be equal, all views are supposed to be equal, then you have no other alternative but to accept. Next Saturday, the 10th of October, people are going to carry guns and come in front of Islamic centers around the United States, including the American Islamic Center of America. The law defends them. That's their personal point of view, and they have the right to exercise. It might be abhorrent to others, but it has been reduced to a particular point of view. There is no such thing as a grand narrative that would reject for them. Even the debate during the caricatures that were drawn in various newspapers about the Holy Prophet, freedom of expression. But is there such a thing as freedom of expression? Really, nobody talked about. So nobody attacked the base. They all stayed fixed on freedom of expression, freedom of expression. You have a number of things in this legal jargons that clearly states that there is no such thing as freedom of expression in the absolute sense. But they say it's their point of view. They are free to do whatever they want. So this notion becomes problematic only in the ontological sense. When not in the sense that you say there are many absolutes. When you remove it, and it's a political move that you say there is no absolute whatsoever. That would counter the community that says there is an absolute thing. I want to clarify this before we move on. So,
if there are two communities who both they are different and on a certain issue, for example, clearly different, they're both firm on it, could they, let's assume they speak the same language, could they speak at the same level, or would they always talk past one another? And if they can speak at the same level, how is it that one cannot win over the other if they were to use rational argument and not appeal to emotions?
well, relativism simply gives it equal value to these two opinions that exist within the same culture.
Just give it to them?
Give,
Without just no thinking?
Yeah, technically, because it's an opinion expressed by a group of people, you have no other alternative but to give it to them, that they are equally valid. But the problem is, how do we establish which one is right or wrong? It's a different position that we have to take. That comes out of McIntyre's argument for this. Says, you live in a society that it's multicultural, multifaceted, that accepts diversity, etc., etc., that they are equally valid. But which one is more valid, or which one is true, which one is false, only comes clear when the synthesis is generated out of the conversation between them. You come up with some valid argument and solid basis that you both agree upon, and you use those as a common denominator to argue with regard to the validity or otherwise of various other opinions.
I think we see very little of this when it comes
Exactly.
to interfaith.
Yeah.
Either
Exactly.
it's a debate where they're talking past each other, or like
Yeah.
you said, kumbaya.
Yes, it's primarily. I mean, this morning there was a program here at the center at 11 to 1 o'clock. There was hardly the theme was supposed to be assessment of the crisis in MENA and why so many people lost their lives. They all attacked Saudi Arabia, but nobody extended the attack to beyond Saudi Arabia, United States, as the main supporter of Saudi Arabia. They all left it at that. So when it comes to issues between Shia and Sunni, the same thing happens. Between various Abrahamic faith, the same thing happens. Serious issues are not addressed, so that we come out of the conversation at least with a synthesis. Go ahead, sister.
I just want to kind of reiterate what you've been saying to make sure that I understand, if that's okay, but we can also move on. Or okay, so the relativism, you would define it as saying there is no absolute truth, but but it's not a problem. What did I write? Oh, not that another person has the right to have their own individual definition of truth. Is that correct?
No, what I said was relativism states that everybody has, or every community has their own value system when it comes to the truth or right or wrong or whatever. So they have their own basis by which they define what is wrong and what is right, because that's the concept of morality. Morality is nothing more than a way through which we distinguish between what is right and what is wrong. So relativism simply talks about the multiplicity of this, because there are multiplicity of communities. I don't think that concept by itself is problematic. It becomes problematic when we move into the ontological base and we say they believe in multiplicity of truth means there is no truth. That certainly becomes a problem. How do we go from, if in the first sphere or phase, how do we resolve the conundrum is through sitting down and having conversation, the same as McIntyre talks about, and coming up with a solution after agreeing on some fundamental principles which are shared between all cultures. By definition, it doesn't mean that everybody has to give up what they have. It doesn't remove the agency. It becomes certainly a problem when we don't have the fundamental basis of our faith or culture or whatever it is, and then we are confronted with another community that is strong in their own faith. The result is the attraction towards metamorphism that takes place, and the bigger community absorbs the smaller community into itself. And this is not because of relativism or multiplicity of opinions, because we do not have an opinion. The fundamental problem is there.
I think what you're explaining, I saw it happen when the whole gay rights issue was coming up, and a lot of Muslims were saying yes, they should have their rights because we want rights as Muslims, and they're a minority also, so minorities should support each other. So that's kind of like accepting each other on that basis and respecting each other's beliefs. So is that relativism in play?
No, that's a call for relativism, yeah. In this, the moral code, they believe in different things and we believe in different things. This notion of sexual relationship outside marriage, for example, within family structure. When you look at the counselors that come in to advise family matters, particularly with Muslim community, their advice is primarily predicated on the Western understanding of the concept. And they advise, I mean, if the father goes, I had a case in Colorado in which the father beat his daughter up for whatever relationship that she had. When the counselor and the court and everybody was involved, the counselor couldn't understand why he did it, because she was coming from a Western perspective. It's her freedom to do what she wants. She is an adult. She can do what she wants. And as a result, it went into the court, and the court severely punished the father. Whether if there was somebody else who understood both sides, then it might have been different. So this notion is a tactical move from a community that has failed to establish itself, and now they want to somehow stand in solidarity with these minor communities because we want to create some power base for ourselves.
So you're able to have relativism as long as you don't violate the law, which means that there is some sort of standard. So it's actually a fallacy. On
philosophical basis, last or the week before, I talked about when this idea came out, Plato rejected it, and his criticism of it, that the principle itself, the claim that there is nothing absolute, contradicts. It's a contradictory statement, because if you consider this statement to be absolute itself, then there is an absolute. And if there is no absolute, then you are contradicting yourself. So this, on a philosophical basis, we can argue one way or the other. I don't believe we can come out of it completely rejecting relativism, particularly when it is being used as within differences or multiplicity of cultures and so on, or norms. It certainly becomes problematic when it moves into there is nothing absolute, nothing of value, no meta-narrative, etc. Well, if some people believe in that, then we have to sit in conversation and come up with some kind of a solution that, no, there are certain things of value in our lives, but irrespective of who you are. Why should I condemn what the Nazis did to Jews if you are not prepared to condemn the same act when the Jews are doing it to the Palestinians? So injustice is injustice. Martin Luther King was right when he said injustice somewhere or tyranny somewhere is tyranny for all, or injustice everywhere. It counters itself. If we accept it, then it becomes problematic. I don't see something out of this beyond this, and I don't believe we should argue that because we have failed to teach our children basic principles of Islam, and they simply don't have anything to stand on, and then they are confronted in a society that attracts them to nothing, and they are absorbed very quickly. Mm-hmm. The failure is somewhere else. Let's use the time for a few other questions, and then if you have, doesn't have to be within this concept. And then probably next week is going to be the last week before Muharram. During Muharram I'm not here, so we'll have to when I come back, inshallah, and see what we can do.
Will you be lecturing anywhere?
Not in Michigan.
Will it be live streamed?
I hope so.
Okay.
I hope so.
What city? What city?
It's going to be California, San Diego. I will be giving a lecture at the university as well as the Islamic Center, so inshallah. So any questions?
No, I understand now.
Not regarding this. Any other questions?
No, I did have a question.
Go ahead.
We were talking about the synthesis, but that's under the assumption that that is possible. Is it truly possible that we could have a synthesis of ideas?
You tell me, why do you think it's not possible?
Because
If it is either or, certainly it is not possible.
I feel
But
like
even
the powerful will always win that.
Powerful in what sense?
For example, you gave the about next Saturday with the guns and whatnot. Well, if Muslims try to do that, that whole freedom and the whole concept of constitution would be thrown out the window. Muslims would never attempt that within the U.S. So that whole concept of truth is only applicable to a certain color. It's
Well,
not even just Muslims, it's even blacks also. Like,
what you are saying, sister, is that Muslims don't have the power.
it's not, I know, I even blacks, so it's just really just whites
Yeah.
have that. So that whole concept
Institutional racism,
is,
isn't it?
it's like
Or system, yeah.
The
that
weak,
whole concept of truth and relativism is only applicable to one race because that race kind of won out. They got the upper hand. That's how I view it. So
What's
we're all kind
interesting-
of like sheep.
What's interesting to me is that one of the arguments you hear from people outside of the U.S. is that the people of the U.S. never stand up to the government. They never make a stand. Yet they've been so convinced of, the demonization of Muslims that they're actually, collaborating, and they've made this movement to have this day on October 9th and 10th to stand up and show these Muslims, like, you're not welcome here. But they're not able to be convinced of the reality of it all. You know what I mean? They're so blindsided by the fact that we are demons. Do you know what I mean? This is what shocks me about that movement.
It's not even just that movement. Like that whole movement with Black Lives Matter, and there was pictures I saw on the internet of like just black people carrying guns walking around. That was like that caused a huge stir. But then you have white people carrying guns all around the South and even here, and nobody thinks twice about that. So that whole concept of truth is only applicable if you are white, basically.
can anyone go in front of any synagogue and carry a gun and express their opinion?
Can you speak out against the state of Israel?
Yeah.
You can't. Then you're called anti-Semitic, and God forbid that you're in a position of leadership or power. That's it, you're done.
So why is it that? So the problem is somewhere else.
So I traced it back because there is no synthesis, as you said. It's
Yes.
not possible.
No, it's because no attempt has been made. There's a difference. There is no attempt in areas where attempt has been have been made to come to a synthesis. Even the white one, who's supposed to be privileged from the system, will stand by you and support you. But in places where either, as you said, with regard to interfaith, it's just kumbaya and sitting together and so on, no synthesis has taken place. With regard to the Islamic Center a few weeks ago, even the member of the board or the council that was supposed to be defending the cause of the Muslim community stood up against them and used the metaphor of the two minaret with the two towers of 9/11. Why? Because we really have not worked hard to be able to establish. We can build centers, mosques, and so on, but this is not threatening. During the Shah's time, when the revolution of 15th of Khordad started in Iran, I was a child, was just gone to Iran with my dad, and my dad got killed, so we went back to Iraq again. The Shah was saying, you want mosques? I'll build you 10,000 mosques. Go inside your mosques and do your prayers. That kind of a mosque is not a threat to the power. A mosque is a threat to the power that tries to generate the synthesis and builds upon the privilege to be part of your establishment, when we haven't done it.
Has it ever been done?
Well, I mean, in places that have been done, we see other minorities coming or other members of the community coming and supporting. After 9/11 in Colorado, all the mosques were circled by white because of works that we did. Serious works, not just having cookies and coffees once a month.
What kind of work?
Well, we did it on a multifaceted basis. Number one, serious issues were dealt with, not just sit back and talk about morality and God and issue. How do we deal with crisis in the community? That's number one. We work together on poverty, yes. We work together with everyone on poverty, on destitution, on homelessness, etc., etc. That was one issue. Number two, the thing that we did was we caused what we called breaking bread together. Once or twice a month, we sat relaxed. One family would be the host, and 20, 30, 40 other families would come in, potluck. Jews, Christian, Muslims, atheists, whatever, communities that existed around. We sat and we talked about issues that touched everyone. Drug, prostitution, kids, truancy, etc., etc. And we all worked together. Khums and zakat that came to the center, I got permission from various ulama that we use a little bit of it for the center, that we need the rest, we can spend it on the community. Then they suddenly saw that at the soup kitchen, we are there. At the work for the homeless, we are there. At the prisons, so on, we worked with them. The moment that 9/11 happened, we were not expecting 9/11. The moment that 9/11 happened, 1,500 white people encircled the main mosque, a Sunni mosque in the middle of Denver. The pictures were all over the place. I was threatened that we would shoot you and so on. The only imam that went to the mosque on that day in Colorado, I was the one. Said, it doesn't matter. It was the neighbors that stood in front of the mosque to prevent any attack on the center.
So I have a question for you regarding this transparency and conversation, talking about drugs, prostitution, maybe like domestic abuse or something like that. I find that a lot of ethnic populations that make up like the Shia community have a very hard time recognizing these as issues, or that, even mental health disorders, they are, ashamed. They don't exist for us. They're not applicable. How are you guys able to overcome that?
Well, we simply called around and offered our services. Whether it was hospices, whether it was soup kitchens, whether it was the same way that I worked as the director of the Abrahamic Initiative at St. John's Cathedral, which was an Episcopal church. They organized a place which they called it Metro Caring. Metro Caring stood up for providing food, little bit of money for those who are in need when it comes to electricity, etc., etc. And we communicated with other centers if they had places for homeless people. A chapter of it was organized by Muslim community, where we went around Muslim community, picked and collected everything that Metro Caring did from the Christian community. We were it was personnel from the Muslim community, but to serve whoever that came to the door. Al-Ansar. So there was that issue. That then I worked with a number of religious and community organizers, in which we work with St. Francis Center at the center of Denver, where we identified during particularly winter days of Colorado, identified various major faith centers that were emptied at night. So we went in. We offered our places, whether it was a mosque, a church, synagogue, or anybody else. So we would go to St. Francis and we bring these people in. I personally cooked for various, I worked with a number of churches and other places in which they provided the ingredients, I cooked. The homeless and the hungry would come to the church, eat, and go downstairs and sleep. When they saw you where it mattered, we went and worked with the judges and the prisons. But here, nobody does it. The best that they can do, we sit, pat each other on the back, and then serious issues like today that we call people to come to condemn the atrocities that have taken place in Mina. 4 sheikh come from the Shia community, that's it. You are preaching to the convert. And then you condemn Saudi Arabia, you are not prepared to go beyond it and say it's the American, because they are the ones that are providing them with the weapon and everything else. That is part of a plan in New Middle East. Nobody talks about politics.